The fluorescent lights of Horizon Logistics buzzed faintly over the fifth-floor conference room, casting a sterile glow across the polished oak table. At 7:00 p.m., as the Seattle skyline twinkled through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the last of the day shift trickled out, their briefcases swinging, their chatter fading down the hall. But for James Jim Callahan, a 72-year-old custodial worker, the night was just beginning. He maneuvered his cleaning cart through the glass doors of the headquarters, his movements deliberate, almost ritualistic. His Navy mule uniform, faded from years of wear, was buttoned to the top, despite the late summer warmth. His ID badge, clipped precisely 1 inch below his left shoulder, bore his name in crisp black letters, J. Callahan, Facilities. Jim had been part of Horizon's heartbeat for 8 years, a quiet constant in a company obsessed with innovation and speed. At 72, his joints ached from decades of service, first in the jungles and deserts of classified military operations, now in the gleaming corridors of corporate America. He didn't complain. He never did. His routine was his anchor. Park his 20-year-old Ford Taurus in the farthest corner of the lot, salute the small folded American flag he kept in his locker, and begin his rounds. He knew which offices needed their trash bins emptied daily, the CFOs, always overflowing with coffee cups, and which could wait, the IT directors, oddly pristine. He memorized which boardrooms required extra polish after client pitches and which restrooms needed a second pass during cold season. His voice, tinged with a faint Montana drawl from his childhood, was reserved for necessity. Good evening, excuse me, all set here. Most employees nodded, some smiled, but few remembered him beyond the moment. To them, he was just the old guy with the mop. It didn't bother Jim. Invisibility had its perks. It let him work in peace, moving through the chaos of corporate ambition like a ghost. But tonight, as he pushed his cart toward Conference Room 5C, the air felt heavier, charged with a tension he couldn't quite place. 3 weeks earlier, Ethan Marshall had stormed into Horizon Logistics as the new operations manager. At 35, with a shiny MBA from a second-tier East Coast school and a closet full of slim-fit suits, Ethan was a man on a mission. He'd been hired to shake things up, to cut costs and drag the company into the 21st century. His PowerPoint decks were filled with buzzwords, scalability, synergy, disruption. His first target, the custodial budget. We're bleeding money on after mouths cleaning, he'd declared at his introductory meeting, his voice sharp with Ivy League confidence. Why pay union rates when we can outsource for half the price? The executives nodded, dazzled by his charts and graphs. No one asked about the human costs. That morning, Jim had received an email from HR, subject line, schedule adjustment. Effective immediately, he'd clean the 4th and 5th floors during business hours, not evenings. Cost optimization initiative, the email read, as if Jim were a line item to be trimmed. He'd adjusted without protest, though the change meant navigating crowded hallways and curious stares. At 10:00 IEM, he steered his cart toward Conference Room 5C, where the schedule showed it would be free from 10:15 to 11:00 dot. He knocked lightly, the sound barely audible over the hum of voices inside. The door swung open and 12 pairs of eyes turned toward him. Ethan Marshall stood at the head of the table, a laser pointer in one hand, a slideshow titled Streamlining Operations glowing behind him. His Navy suit was tailored to perfection, his tie a bold red that screamed ambition. "Can I help you?" Ethan's tone was syrupy, the kind of polite that felt like a slap. He scanned Jim's uniform, his gray hair, the worn handle of the mop in his hand. "Scheduled cleaning," Jim said, his voice steady, pointing to the tablet clipped to his cart. "Shows the room's open now." Ethan's smile tightened, his eyes flicking to the team for effect. "Well, we're clearly still here. Your schedule's outdated." A few employees shifted uncomfortably in their seats. "Sorry for the mix-up," Jim said, already backing his cart out. "I'll swing by later." "Hold up," Ethan called, his voice now laced with a theatrical edge. He turned to the room, his grin widening like a predator sensing easy prey. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is exactly what I'm talking about. Legacy systems, legacy problems." He gestured toward Jim, his hands sweeping as if presenting a museum exhibit. This is what happens when we cling to the past. Manual schedules, human error, inefficiency. A ripple of laughter spread through the room, nervous at first, then bolder. A young analyst in a blazer smirked. Another whispered something that made her neighbor chuckle. Jim stood still, his face a mask of calm. No flush of anger, no flicker of humiliation, just the same quiet resolve that had carried him through far worse than a room full of corporate egos. Ethan wasn't done. He stepped closer, his voice rising for maximum impact. "You're obsolete, old man. Take your mop and get out. Maybe try a calendar from this decade." The laughter erupted now, loud and unrestrained. Someone clapped. Another muttered, "Grandpa's lost," just loud enough for the room to hear. Ethan basked in it, his eyes gleaming with the thrill of dominance. Jim's gaze didn't waver. He nodded once, a single measured dip of his chin, and pulled his cart back. The door closed softly behind him, the sound swallowed by the ongoing laughter. In the hallway, he checked his tablet again. The schedule had been updated. By Ethan Marshall 20 minutes earlier, marking 5C as occupied until 11:30. Deliberate move, Jim realized, though he didn't dwell on it. He'd seen traps before, in jungles and war zones, and this one was amateur at best. As he moved down the corridor, his cart's wheels whispering against the carpet, a young data analyst named Sarah Newen lingered outside the conference room. She'd joined Horizon a year ago, fresh out of college, and had always noticed Jim's quiet precision, the way he cleaned with the focus of a craftsman, the way he never joined the other custodians for lunch. Once, arriving early, she'd seen him in the supply closet, standing before a neatly folded American flag, his hand raised in a salute so crisp it looked like it belonged in a history book. She never mentioned it, but it stuck with her. "That was uncalled for," Sarah said, catching up to Jim as he paused by the elevator. Her voice was low, almost apologetic. "Ethan's new. He's trying to prove something." Jim's weathered face softened just a fraction. "No harm done, Miss Manwin. I've heard worse from better men." His tone was gentle, but there was steel beneath it, a strength that made Sarah pause. She noticed his posture, ramrod straight, despite his age, like a soldier standing at attention. "Has he been targeting you since he got here?" she asked, her brow furrowing. "Nothing I can't handle," Jim replied, already moving his cart toward the next room. "Everyone's got their battles. Most just don't wear 'em on their sleeve." Sarah watched him go, her indignation growing. Ethan's smugness, the room's laughter, the casual cruelty, it churned in her gut. She didn't know Jim's full story, but she knew enough to sense something extraordinary beneath his quiet exterior. And she wasn't the only one watching. In the shadows of the hallway, another pair of eyes followed Jim's steady retreat. Someone who knew exactly who James Callahan was and what he'd done in a life most in that conference room couldn't begin to imagine. The stage was set, and the reckoning was coming. The hum of Horizon Logistics' fifth floor was quieter the next morning, as if the building itself held its breath after yesterday's confrontation in Conference Room 5C. Jim Callahan arrived at his usual 7:00 p.m., his Ford Taurus creaking into its familiar corner spot in the Seattle parking lot. He buttoned his faded Navy uniform, clipped his ID badge with surgical precision, and saluted the folded American flag in his locker, a ritual that grounded him, a tether to a life most at Horizon could never fathom. But today, as he pushed his cleaning cart through the glass-lined corridors, something felt different. Whispers followed him. Eyes lingered a beat too long. The weight of yesterday's laughter still hung in the air, but so did something else. Anticipate. At 9:45 a.m., as Jim polished the brass handles of the executive wing, a black Chevy Tahoe rolled into the visitor lot below. Its government plates gleamed under the morning sun, a small Department of Defense sticker on the windshield catching the light. Colonel Mike Brennan stepped out, his Army service uniform immaculate. dark blue jacket adorned with the silver eagle of a full colonel, service ribbons stacked in perfect rows across his chest, shoes polished to a mirror sheen. At 55, his face carried the lines of a man who'd seen too much, but his stride was pure purpose, each step echoing with the authority of a soldier who'd walked through hell and come out standing. He'd planned to wear civilian clothes today, a low-key visit to discuss Horizon's McKinley contract, a $50 million zero-cents Army logistics deal that kept the company's lights on, but a late-night call from Sarah Gwynn, the young analyst who'd witnessed Ethan Marshall's cruelty, had changed everything. Mike had served under Jim Callahan decades ago. He knew the man behind the mop, and he wasn't here to play nice. Inside Conference Room 5C, Ethan Marshall was in his element, his red tie blazing against his tailored suit as he paced before a new slideshow. Operational Overhaul, Phase 2. The room buzzed with the usual mix of boredom and sycophantic nods from the operations team. Ethan's voice dripped with confidence, his laser pointer dancing across charts of cost savings and headcount reductions. "We're cutting the fat," he declared, pausing for effect, starting with outdated systems and outdated people. Through the glass panel of the door, Jim pushed his cart past, his eyes fixed forward, his shoulders squared despite the ache in his knees. Sarah, seated near the back, caught his glance and felt her stomach twist. She'd made the call to Colonel Brennan last night, her voice shaking as she recounted Ethan's humiliation of Jim. Her father, a Vietnam vet, had taught her to recognize the quiet strength of men like Jim, the ones who carried their scars in silence. She hadn't expected Brennan to show up in full-dress uniform, but now, as she saw a shadow approach the door, her pulse quickened. The door swung open with a force that silenced the room. Conversations stopped mid-sentence, coffee cups frozen halfway to lips. Colonel Brennan filled the doorway, his presence a thunderclap in the sterile space. His eyes, sharp as a hawk's, scanned the room before locking onto Ethan. With 3 deliberate steps, he crossed to the door's interior lock and turned the deadbolt. The click echoed like a gavel. 20 pairs of eyes followed him, confusion giving way to awe as they registered the uniform, the ribbons, the unyielding posture of a man who commanded respect without saying a word. Ethan recovered first, his professional smile sliding into place. "Excuse me, sir. This is a private meeting," he said, his tone smooth but edged with irritation. "If you have business with Horizon, our front desk can—" "Not anymore," Brennan cut in, his voice low but carrying the weight of a battlefield command. "This meeting now concerns honor, sacrifice, and the kind of debt you can't put on a spreadsheet." The room went deathly silent. Through the glass, Jim paused in the hallway, his mop still, his face unreadable, but his eyes meeting Brennan's for a fleeting moment, a signal passed between warriors across years and wars. Brennan stepped to the center of the room, his polished shoes clicking against the hardwood. "That man you mocked yesterday," he said, pointing toward Jim, "is Master Sergeant James Callahan, United States Army Special Forces retired. 25 years of service, most of it in operations so classified they're still redacted." Ethan's smile faltered, his face paling as Brennan's words landed like artillery rounds. "The man you called obsolete has been honored by 2 presidents. He's carried men out of kill zones, stitched wounds under mortar fire, and buried brothers you'll never know the names of." The room was a vacuum now, the air sucked out by the gravity of Brennan's presence. He didn't raise his voice, but every word was a blade. "In 1982, I was a green lieutenant in a classified op in Central America. Our unit was ambushed, pinned down in a jungle ravine for 4 days. No food, no backup, just relentless enemy fire. I took a round to the leg, bleeding out in the mud, certain I'd die there." His voice cracked, just for a second, and Sarah felt her throat tighten. "Master Sergeant Callahan crawled through 400 yards of hostile terrain under sniper fire to reach me. He dragged me back, patched me up with his own kit, and gave me his last sip of water. He carried me 3 miles to exfil, all while drawing fire to keep the rest of our team alive." Brennan's eyes burned into Ethan, who stood frozen, his laser pointer dangling uselessly. "That man didn't just mop floors, Mr. Marshall. He mopped blood off stretchers so men like me could see their kids again. He held the line when the world was falling apart. And you, You dared to call him useless because he's 72 and carries a mop instead of a rifle? Bane. A sob broke the silence. Sarah, her hands trembling, wiped her eyes. Others followed, their faces crumpling as the weight of Jim's unseen sacrifices settled over them. The analyst who'd smirked yesterday stared at the table, his cheeks flushed with shame. Another employee, a middle-aged woman, clutched her notepad, tears streaking her mascara. Ethan tried to speak, his voice a weak croak. I didn't know. That's the problem, Brennan snapped, his voice rising for the first time. You didn't ask. You saw an old man with a mop and thought you could bury him in your efficiency plan. He turned to the door and unlocked it, his movements precise. Master Sergeant Callahan, please join us. Jim stepped inside, his weathered hand still on his mop, his face as calm as ever. Nothing in his posture screamed hero. No swagger, no demand for recognition, just the quiet dignity of a man who'd faced death and chosen duty every time. Brennan faced the room again, his voice softening but no less commanding. This man was my first CO. He trained me, he saved me, and he carries more honor in one callous finger than this entire room could hope to hold. Ethan's bravado was gone, his face ashen. Colonel, I apologize, he stammered, turning to Jim. Master Sergeant Callahan, I was out of line. My behavior was unprofessional, and I'm deeply sorry. His words were hollow, a corporate reflex, but the room didn't care. Eyes were on Jim, searching for the warrior Brennan described in the unassuming figure before them. Jim nodded once, his expression unchanged. Accepted, he said simply, then turned to leave. But Sarah stood, her voice breaking the silence. Wait, please. She crossed the room, her eyes wet. My dad was a vet. He never talked about it, but I know what it means to carry that weight. Thank you, Mr. Callahan, for everything. The room erupted in applause. Not the mocking claps of yesterday, but a raw, heartfelt outpouring. Employees stood, some saluting awkwardly, others wiping tears. Jim looked uncomfortable, his gaze dropping to the floor. He wasn't here for this. He never had been. Brennan leaned in, his voice low. Jim, I'm sorry I had to do it this way. Sarah's coal. I couldn't let it stand. Jim gave a small smile, the first of the day. No harm done, Mike. Just doing my job. But as he left, the room remained standing. A silent vow to never overlook him again. 2 weeks later, Ethan Marshall resigned, citing new opportunities. The truth was uglier, multiple complaints about a toxic work environment, spearheaded by Sarah and backed by half the operations team, had made his position untenable. Horizon's CEO, shaken by the near loss of the McKinley contract, unveiled a bronze plaque outside Jim's supply closet. Master Sergeant James Callahan, USA Army Special Forces, honored for unwavering service. Jim had protested, but the company insisted. The ceremony was brief per his request, 5 minutes, no speeches. The 5th floor was different now. When Jim entered a room, conversations paused, not out of fear, but reverence. Employees nodded, some saluted, and the security guards stood a little straighter. Jim didn't acknowledge it. He didn't need to. He cleaned with the same precision, saluted his flag each night, and parked in the same corner spot. But the plaque gleamed under the lobby lights, polished daily, not by order, but by choice. The Seattle rain fell in a steady drizzle, painting the Horizon Logistics building in shades of silver as James Jim Callahan pulled his Ford Taurus into its usual corner spot at 7:00 p.m. It was a Thursday, 3 months after Colonel Mike Brennan's seismic intervention in Conference Room 5C. Jim buttoned his Navy uniform to the collar, clipped his ID badge 1 inch below his left shoulder, and paused at his locker to salute the folded American flag. A ritual unchanged, a quiet vow to a life of service. At 72, his hands bore the scars of decades, calluses from gripping rifles, faint burns from field dressings applied under fire, yet they moved with the same precision, polishing doorknobs, aligning carpet lines, ensuring every corner of Horizon's headquarters gleamed. The bronze plaque outside his supply closet, Master Sergeant James Callahan, U.S. Army Special Forces, honored for unwavering service, caught the lobby's light, polished daily by unseen hands. Jim never touched it. Recognition wasn't his currency. Inside, the fifth floor hummed differently now. The air carried a reverence, a shift in the company's pulse. Employees no longer rushed past Jim with distracted nods. They paused, offered quiet good evenings, or stood straighter, as if his presence demanded it. The operations team, once a chorus of mocking laughter, now watched him with a mix of awe and guilt. Sarah Nguyen, the young analyst who'd sparked the change, made a point to greet him daily, her eyes bright with respect. But Jim remained the same, soft-spoken, methodical, invisible by choice. He didn't seek the spotlight. He never had. His work was his testament, each polished surface a reflection of a man who served when no one was watching. Horizon Logistics was transforming. The fallout from Ethan Marshall's resignation had forced the C-suite to confront their blind spots. The McKinley contract, the company's financial lifeline, had teetered after Colonel Brendan's visit, a warning shot from the Department of Defense that disrespecting veterans carried consequences. The CEO, Margaret Hensley, a pragmatic woman who'd climbed from intern to corner office, acted swiftly. 2 weeks after the incident, she'd called an all-hands meeting in the lobby, her voice steady but laced with shame. "We failed one of our own," she'd said, standing beside Jim's plaque. "Master Sergeant Callahan's service, past and present, demands better from us. We start fixing that today." The changes came fast. Horizon launched a veteran support network, a monthly meeting in conference room 5C now, unofficially dubbed Callahan's Corner by employees. The group, led by Sarah and a grizzled IT manager who'd served in Desert Storm, became a safe haven for the company's dozen veterans, from mailroom clerks to senior analysts. They shared stories of service, struggles with civilian life, and the quiet pride of carrying on. Jim attended once at Sarah's insistence, but sat silently in the back, his weathered hands folded. When asked to speak, he'd shaken his head. "I'm here to listen," he'd said, his Montana drawl soft but firm. The room hadn't pressed him. His presence was enough. HR rolled out sensitivity training, mandatory for all 300 employees. The sessions, held in the same conference room where Ethan had mocked Jim, dissected the invisible sacrifices of veterans in the workforce. A facilitator, a retired Navy officer, showed slides of soldiers returning home, their uniforms traded for aprons or tool belts, their heroism buried under daily routines. "You don't see their medals," she'd said, "but you see their work. Respect it." Employees left those sessions quieter, their eyes lingering on Jim as he vacuumed the halls. Some apologized directly, their voices halting, ashamed. Jim always nodded, his face unreadable. "No harm done," he'd say, then return to his cart. But the apologies piled up, a silent debt the company was only beginning to repay. The most poignant change came on Veterans Day. Horizon shut down operations for 1 hour at 11 o'clock a.m., not for speeches or ceremonies, but for a period of silence in the fifth-floor break room. Jim's flag, the one he saluted each night, was placed on a small table, flanked by candles. Employees filed in, some veterans wearing old unit patches, others clutching photos of loved ones who'd served. No one spoke. The only sound was the faint hum of the building and the occasional sniffle. Jim stood at the back, his posture ramrod straight, his eyes fixed on the flag. Sarah, standing beside him, noticed a single tear trace his weathered cheek, gone as quickly as it appeared. When the hour ended, he left without a word, returning to his rounds. The company had offered him the day off. Paid, he'd refused. Work needs doing, he'd said, and that was that. But beneath the surface, something stirred, a ripple that threatened to become a wave. Sarah noticed it first. Whispers in the break room, hushed conversations among the operations team. A new manager, Claire Donovan, had replaced Ethan, her approach softer but no less ambitious. She'd been pushing for more cost cuts, her eyes scanning the custodial budget with the same cold math Ethan had wielded. "We're still overpaying for in-house cleaning," she'd said in a recent meeting, her tone careful but pointed. The words hadn't reached Jim yet, but Sarah felt a chill. History was creeping back, testing the company's newfound resolve. One rainy afternoon, as Jim cleaned the executive wing, Sarah found him wiping down a glass partition. His movements were as precise as ever, but she saw a slight tremor in his hands, a reminder of his 72 years, of a body that had endured more than most could imagine. "Mr. Callahan," she said, her voice hesitant, "I heard something in the break room. They're talking about outsourcing again. Claire's pushing it." Jim paused, his cloth hovering over the glass, his eyes, sharp despite the lines around them, met hers. "Appreciate the heads up, Ms. Wynn," he said, his voice steady, "but I have faced worse than budget cuts." He resumed his work, the cloth moving in slow, deliberate arcs. Sarah's chest tightened. "Why don't you ever fight back?" she asked, her voice breaking. "You could have told them who you are years ago. Stopped all this. You don't need to take it." Jim set the cloth down, his gaze distant, as if seeing jungles and battlefields instead of corporate glass. "When I was 25, serving meant wearing a uniform everyone saluted," he said softly. "At 40, it meant leading men through hell, knowing half wouldn't come back. At 60, it meant finding a new way to keep order when my body couldn't carry a pack anymore." He straightened, his spine aligning like a soldier at attention. "I didn't stop being a soldier because I picked up a mop, Miss Nguyen. I stopped needing to prove it. The real honor's in the work no one sees." Sarah's eyes welled up, her throat too tight to speak. She wanted to hug him, to thank him, to scream at the company for ever daring to undervalue him. But Jim just nodded, his small smile a shield against her emotion. "You've got a good heart," he said. "Hold on to it." He picked up his cloth and moved on, the conversation over in that quiet, final way of his. That evening, as Jim prepared to leave, he noticed something new in the lobby. A small display case had been installed beside his plaque, holding a single item, a faded green beret, its edges frayed from years of use. No label, no explanation, just the beret, a silent testament to a life of sacrifice. Sarah had pushed for it, convincing HR to honor Jim without forcing him into another ceremony. He stared at it for a long moment, his fingers brushing the glass, then turned and walked into the rain. But the story wasn't over. As Jim's Taurus disappeared into the Seattle night, a figure watched from the fifth-floor window. Claire Donovan stood with a tablet in hand, her eyes narrowed at the latest budget projections. Beside her, a junior executive whispered, "If we push outsourcing again, it'll be a fight. Callahan's untouchable now." Claire's lips thinned, her voice cold. "No one's untouchable. Not in this economy." The rain streaked the glass, blurring her reflection, but her resolve was clear. A storm was brewing at horizon, one that would test the company's heart and Jim's unbreakable spirit once more.